Hello and welcome to Crafting with the Desmond-Fish Public Library. My name is Beth and today I'm going to show you how to make a simple notebook using a Japanese bookbinding stitch. So there's a couple things we're going to need for this and some things that are optional. What you're going to need for sure is a needle, preferably an embroidery needle with a big hole in it, and some kind of sturdy thread. I'm going to use embroidery floss. You're also going to need a ruler and a pencil and a glue stick. Now the things that are going to make my job and your job much easier are a bone folder and a cork and a pair of pliers. And that's because I do not have a bookbinding punch, and I'm sure many of you out there also don't have a bookbinding punch, but all you need is a cork and a needle. And you put the needle, and voila, your very own bookbinding punch. I have the pliers, so when it comes time to sew, I can take my needle back out. Okay, so you're going to need paper for the pages. I've decided to make mine 4x6, and I've cut out 34 pieces of paper. Now I'm just using sketch paper from a sketchbook. I just tore pages out. It is a 400 series sketch paper, so it's a nice sort of weight, but it's not too heavy. So you're going to cut out however many pages you want. I have 34, and you're going to need 2 pieces of heavier duty paper cardstock for covers. I used Bristol board, and I cut it to the same size, so this is 4x6. Now, I could just go ahead and make a plain white notebook with red thread, but I wanted mine to be a little more decorative. So what you can do, and you should do this step before you start sewing everything together, is you can decorate your cover. You can draw on it, you can paint on it. I decided to get some decorative paper I have and I covered mine. So I'm going to show you how I made a cover like this that I'm going to use for my book. It's actually pretty straightforward. I took my thick piece of cardstock. This is actually Bristol board, is the weight of this. And I had a pad of really nice marbled paper. And I cut a page that was a little bit bigger than this. And you'll notice it's not an exact size within it. That just had to do with the width of my paper and my constraints. I didn't want to waste any. So what I'm going to do, and one thing I really enjoy having is this mat with a grid on it, because it makes sure everything is nice and square. Is I am going to line up, let's see if you can see this, I am going to line up my Bristol board inside of my decorative paper. And I am going to take my bone folder and I am just going to go along the edges. And this creates a really nice guide for the paper to fold along, and it allows you to fold the paper really nicely, crisply, and straight around it. So I'm using the edge of my cardstock and I'm just tracing along with my bone folder. And now my paper is going to want to fold really nicely. So I'm going to go and fold all my edges over. And now, so that it glues down nicely, I am going to cut away the corners that are marked here by the folds. And I'm going to cut a little bit further this way so I have less overlap. So I'm going to cut just forward the edge of it there. And I'm going to cut right on the fold this direction. So right on the fold, going from this direction and for this direction, a teeny bit past the fold. This will just make my paper lie nice and flat. There are many ways you could cover it. If you had made your edges even all the way around, you could fold it on the diagonal, which would look nice. This is what I'm doing because it is the paper and the dimensions of paper that I had. So now my piece of paper looks like this. And I'm going to take my glue stick and I'm going to cover one side of this in glue. And I'm going to make sure I get right to the edges. I want to get right to the edges, but I also don't want to smear glue all over my board. So I like to take a piece of scrap paper and put it down so that I can make sure I'm getting right to the edges of whatever it is I'm gluing, and I'm not getting glue on the table or whatever work surface I'm using. And I'm going to put some in the middle. I'm going to flip it over so the glue side is facing my decorative paper. I'm going to fold one edge over and I'm going to slot it in. The nice thing about a glue stick is once you put it down, there's still a little bit of wiggle room for moving things around, so I can line it up nicely. I'm now going to take my bone folder and I'm going to rub it. And what this is doing is just making sure that the bond between the two papers is really nice and that there's no air trapped in there. And it's going to get it really nice and flat flush onto the piece of card. So now I'm going to glue my flaps down. I'm going to take scrap paper. I'm going to run my glue. I'm going to do my side ones first, the smaller ones. Then I'm going to do the longer ones. Now I can see this edge is already curling up a little, so I'm just going to put a little more glue. So now one side is very nicely covered, and what I'm going to do is I got a piece of rice paper of a color that complements the marbled paper, and I cut it so that it is a 1/2 inch smaller than my other piece. So this is 4 by 6, so this is 3.5 by 5.5. And I am going to cover it in glue, making sure not to get it on my work surface, because then I start gluing stuff to this work surface. That is not ideal. Line this up, and I'm not worrying about this being too perfect. I really just want it to cover the white space. And I'm going to pat it down, and now I'm going to take my bone folder, I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to work out towards the edge, and I'm going to use it to press down. And I'm just going to make sure that there's a really nice strong bond between the two papers and the glue. And it's going to make sure there's no air trapped in between them. And now I have my two covers. So the next thing I need to do is punch holes so that I can sew the thread through that will hold everything together. And for the Japanese stitch I'm going to show you today, you need 3 holes. I'm going to show you where to put them. You want 3 evenly spaced holes, and you want them an even space in. So I made my paper 4 inches because that makes for a really easy spacing. So just means I will have 1 hole every inch. I want these holes an inch away from my edge. So I'm going to draw a guideline an inch in. And what I'm doing, because I sometimes have trouble making sure things are perpendicular, not an edge, so I'm making sure that this edge of my ruler matches this line and this edge this line, and that way I know that they are nicely perpendicular to each other. And I'm going to draw a little line there across my 1 inch in mark. And I now have 3 marks where I want my holes. Now, one of the nice things about having not just a needle, because I could, if I had a needle, easily poke through these, but with the cork on the end, the punch, means I can do more pages at once, which means the whole thing goes much faster. So I'm going to do 6 pages at a time. There's a couple of different ways you can do this now. You can, first I'm going to pick up my punch that rolled on the floor. Haha. Okay, let's tilt this a bit better. So I can, if I want, really just hold it and go for it and push it through, and that works just fine. You can also, if you have a self-healing mat, just stab into the mat. Or what I do is my table has this crack running down it, which is a perfect thing to use as a punch. So I line up my pages so that where the hole is going to be is over it, and then I can punch through the paper, down, and pull it back up. And this I find works really well for me. I would not recommend it if you have an expensive, beautiful wood table with a really nice finish that you care deeply about and would be very upset if you scratched with a needle. My table is not very fancy and it's pretty darn sturdy. And that's how I'm going to go about punching my holes. I'm going to do them in batches of 6. So let me show you one more time. Got 6 pages here. I am measuring an inch in from the edge, drawing my guideline, and then marking a little cross every inch to make 3 marks. There are my marks. And I only mark the top page. I just sort of rack them all so I can make sure all the pages are the same together. I take my punch and I punch my holes. So I'm going to do my last stack of paper and I will be right back. Okay, so I now have all of my pages punched and I'm going to do my cover. Now for my cover, I'm going to measure and mark on the inside because I don't want my pencil marks to show as opposed to the outside. So I'm going to do it a little bit more carefully. So I'm measuring 1 inch in, and I'm eyeballing about where this is going to cross over, and I'm making a little line. So now I can find my line, I'm making a little line across it, and I have a little X where the lines overlap, and I know that is where to punch my holes. And I am going to just very carefully and there you have it. I have 3 holes. Yeah, there you can see them. In both of my covers and all of my pages. So now what's left is how we're going to attach them all together. And I'm going to show you a stitch today that is called a Japanese bookbinding stitch. And I made myself a little practice to do first. So when it's done, it's going to look like this. So I no longer need my punch, and now I do need my needle. So I'm just going to use a pair of pliers, and boop, it just pulls right out. And now I have a needle again. Now I recommend using thread that's a little stronger than just normal sewing thread. If you have something that gets called like a coat thread or a waxed thread or embroidery floss, those all work really well. Let's see how quickly I can thread this needle while on camera. There we go. Oh, nope, not quite. I think that this may be an off-camera moment. Okay, now that I have all of my sheets marked and punched, I am almost ready to start putting it all together. Before I actually start doing the stitches though, I'm going to do myself a favor and make sure that everything is lined up and nice and easy to go through. So I'm going to go through my first hole here, make sure it goes through, and once I'm through, I'm going to wiggle my needle around like this, and this is just going to widen the hole for me. And then I'm going to do each of them like that. And once I've got them, I'm going to clip them together. I'm going to go through each of the holes. This way I know that they're aligned and I know that the needle fits through because I want the stitching to be easy. It's especially important if, like me, you're using an embroidery needle instead of a bookbinding needle because it's actually sharper than you want. A darning needle would actually be nice because you don't want to be poking new holes each stitch. You want to be going through the holes you made. So I recommend clipping your sheets together, putting your needle and wiggling it around. You want to be able to hold up your stack to the light and see the light through each 3 holes at the same time. That way you know they're aligned nicely. And now we're going to line up the covers. So I'm going to unclip this to keep it pinched, and I'm going to line up the holes with the covers. Front cover, pages, back cover, And this seems finicky and this takes a little extra time, but you're really doing yourself a favor for when it comes time to do the stitching. So you're not worrying about what stitch to do next and struggling to get the needle to go all the way through. So I'm making sure that my needle and my thread can pass easily through all of my holes. And then I know that it is nicely lined up. Okay, now I am ready to actually start binding it. So the first stitch we do, we're going to start in the back. Mine is the same front and back, so I've just arbitrarily decided that this is the back. I'm going to start in the back, middle hole, and push through to the front. And I'm going to pull my string through until I have a nice tail. I am then going to go in the front top hole and push it through to the back. And I should now have one red stitch. Next, I am going to loop it from the back over the top and go back in the front, going in the front of the top hole again. This time, having looped around the top edge there. And now I'm going to loop it around the side to make a square. You can see I've got that, and I'm going to loop it around the side so that it is a square. And I'm going to go into the front top hole yet again. Wiggle it a bit to get it there. Come on. There we go. And then I'm going to sort of nudge it until it's nice and perpendicular, and then I'm going to pull it tight. And that is the top corner done. So next, what I do is I am going to go, so I'm in the back of the book now, I'm going to go in the back middle hole, push through, so I'm coming out the front middle hole, and then I'm going to go in the front bottom hole. Okay, and then next I am going to flip up. I'm going to do basically the opposite of what I did before. I'm going to come up, wrap it around the bottom, and go through the front bottom hole again, which makes a loop that holds the bottom there. Then I'm going to loop it to the side and go in the front bottom hole a third time. Make sure it's nice and perpendicular and pull it tight. And now I'm going to go out the top, sorry, I'm going to go in the back middle to the front middle. And I'm going to pull it to the side, and now you can see I have something the same the front and back. All I have to do to finish it is tie these two together. So I have way more thread than I needed because the first time I did this, I ran out. So I was feeling a little bit paranoid. So I'm going to trim this. And you could tie your knots here. I like it so that my knot is over in line with the rest of it. And I'm not great at tying knots, so it's a bit I'm struggling with. But it's easier if you have a friend hold that bit down tight. And now I can unclip it. And there we go. I have a front and back cover and several pages all sewn together. And that is one of the simpler bookbinding stitches. It's often referred to as the Japanese bookbinding stitch. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you have fun making your own notebooks. See you all next week.